Evening, everybody. It is 6:02 p.m. on January 5th, 2023. This is the first regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Board for this calendar year. I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. With me tonight is Vice Chair Amelia Aboff, our clerk Erin Gino, Jahan Habib, and I believe Debbie Howard Easton is present, but on the phone. Debbie, if you can just unmute yourself to let us know that you are in fact present.
I am present.
Wonderful, thank you. So pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Act of 2022, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded. We have two items on our agenda this evening, one of which is 200 McGrath Highway, which has requested a continuance to the next meeting we have, which I believe is the 19th. Is that right, the 19th?
Mr. Chair, this is Emily Hutchings. That is correct.
Okay. The chair moves to continue that agenda item to the 19th, seconded by Amelia. The chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Agenda item is continued. The other agenda item that we have is under other business, and that is previously opened and discussed, which is 299 Broadway. We have had a presentation by the applicant. We have had discussion with the applicant and staff. We have had a discussion with both the ward councilor and the councilor at large, who have been and multiple councilors who have been integral to this application. And we have also left written comment open, not testimony, but comment open through, I believe it was 12/30, 2022, for folks to be able to write in and let their opinions be recognized. And following all of that, it is the planning board's role, this particular application and the type that it is, to make a recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the permit granting authority for this particular application. And so the planning board will do its job and make a recommendation this evening. And what we'd like first is to have the applicant and or the applicant's representative or representatives to be unmuted and to be able to discussion with the board before we move forward in making a recommendation to the ZBA. I see Attorney Adam Dash is present, but Attorney Dash, if you could just identify yourself for the record, please.
Yes, Attorney, thank you, Mr. Chair. Attorney Adam Dash, 48 Grove Street in Somerville. I'm here representing the applicants, Mark Development LLC, Beacon Community Services LLC, and Rise Together LLC. If you would like, I would like to let you know who's here because we brought the whole team to cover anything that may come up. For Mark Development, Robert Korf, Damian Chaviano, and Adam Benjamin are here. For Beacon, Leanne Hanfield-Curtin is here. For Rise Together, Herbie Duverne is here. For building design, we have Tim Love from UTL Architects. For sustainability items, we have Jeff Geisinger from UTL Architects. Regarding landscaping issues, we have Morgan Barnacote from Future Green. For parking, traffic, mobility issues, we have Randy Hart from VHB. For civil and stormwater matters, we have Jack Richards and Jared Walsh from Bowler Engineering. And on any environmental matters, we have Matt Heil from Sanborn Head and Associates. So we have everything covered to cover any questions anybody may have. At the last hearing on December 15th, 2022, we presented the 40B mixed use project for this Old Star Market site. And we're back with the team to answer the questions and so that you can make a recommendation to the ZBA should you decide to do so. We have no other presentation and there's nothing left to say, I think, at this point.
Thank you very much, Attorney Dash. I just realized, Emily, I need to be made I believe it's a presenter so I can see everybody who's in attendance tonight, because a lot of the folks that Attorney Dash recognized. I don't see on my list of attendees.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. I will do that right now.
Totally fine.
Yeah, there are Robert and Damien from Mark Development, and Tim, the architect, and Herbie from Rise Together, and Jeff from the Architecture and Sustainability, and Adam Benjamin from Mark Development. So that's some of the crew. Oh, and Randy Hart from VHB, our parking and traffic guy.
Actually, Emily, I wonder if I need to be made an organizer.
I believe you are correct. Give me one more
Sorry,
moment.
you can be the presenter if you want. I don't care.
All right. Should be all set.
Okay. I think I have to make you the presenter again because I have zero interest in sharing my screen.
One moment. I can
I got
make Mr. You good?
I got you as a presenter, I think.
Oh,
Am I still here? Yes.
quick fix. All right.
Here we go. This is what I'm used to. Like Admiral Stockdale. Who am I? Why am I here? Very dated reference for a lot. So
I got it, Mr. Chair.
thanks, Adam. You're making me feel better about myself. Okay, great. Let's have a discussion then. Because the planning board definitely heard some very positive things from the city councilors who spoke to us a couple of weeks ago. And we've had a pretty, I think, productive and helpful dialogue back and forth with you and your client and the team. One of the things that we did hear some concerns about, or that I recall that we heard concerns about from the councilors, were some of the waivers that being requested. And so I was hoping we might be able to have a discussion on some of that. I know Amelia had expressed an interest in having you discuss some of the waivers, but I'm going to defer to her as to which she would like to have some additional discussion on, because I would share that as well.
Mr. Chair, I think there were, I'm sorry, I think there were three waivers that we specifically discussed last time at the end of the meeting, which were on stormwater runoff, on loading, and on parking.
Yes. I'm hoping you might be able to, you, the team, could discuss each of those with a little bit of detail, why you're seeking them, so we might be able to have some feedback as it relates to a recommendation that we might make to the ZBA.
Sure. Damien, do you want to talk about the reason why we're seeking them, and then maybe Randy could talk more about the data behind it?
Well, I think, Adam, if I may, there were 3 specific waivers that the planning board member just mentioned. Why don't we take them one by one? And with stormwater being the first, maybe Bowler could speak to that, why it's necessary that we're seeking those waivers.
We have, I guess, Emily, do we have Jack Richards or Jared Walsh promotable?
I am looking. I don't see a Jack Richards or a Jared Walsh. Could they be under different names?
Something under Bowler
Oh, I see.
Engineering.
Okay, I
I
see
see a Zachary Richards.
There we go.
Zach Richard, right?
I'm
All
sorry,
right.
Zach, my mistake.
All right, I've promoted Mr. Richards.
Hello, everyone. There I am.
Hello, Zach.
Zachary Richards with Bowler, or the site civil engineer on the project. I'll keep it brief and happy to dive into more detail on anything. But as far as the stormwater goes, we've taken an approach here to to propose a number of underground stormwater systems across the site as part of the project. Those will reduce peak rates of runoff during all storm events. They will meet the Somerville requirements that the 10-year post-development storm event meets or is below the existing 2-year storm event in terms of peak rate of runoff. The challenge on this site is the environmental challenges and constraints here. It's anticipated that infiltration will not be allowed on site. So essentially, we're going to need relief from the 10 to 2-year volume requirement, reduction in volume of runoff, because as you could expect, if we can't infiltrate, there's nowhere else for the stormwater to go except off-site, so we can't reduce the actual amount of volume of stormwater. Eventually, it will have to be discharged off-site. So again, happy to dive into any more detail on that, but it's essentially an environmental constraint.
Thank you for your response. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments from members of the planning board on your response and request for that waiver. I don't, but there may be others.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hoping you might be able to speak to the second of your three.
Yes, if I may, through the chair on, I think the second one was your question related to loading. Adam Dash, could you refresh my memory? I know we have a number of waivers here. What was the specific waiver we're seeking as it relates to loading?
I would have to pull the list up, Robert. I mean, I know we're doing loading off of Broadway, which is a pedestrian street district, which is typically not allowed. But I don't think anybody wants the load. And that pedestrian street district, if you recall, also is Temple Street. So the only other place to do the loading would be off of the residential Sewell Street in the back, which nobody wants. So obviously Broadway is the choice. I know that is one of the waivers. Do you have the waiver list handy, Tim or Adam B? I can pull it up, but
maybe you should pull it up, but I could add a little bit more.
I'm grabbing it. Just give me a second.
I can add a little bit more.
I'm a little confused by that because we have accommodations for, say move-ins, move-outs, on site, for both buildings. So, Tim, I'm just a bit confused as to what we're speaking to, that's all.
That might be one of the waivers that we were conservative about asking for based on an interpretation. But I can't recall the reason. I mean, the challenge with the site is that it only has 2 frontages and they're both pedestrian zones on Broadway and Temple. And
Right. Yeah.
That requires using the existing curb cut on Broadway to get some of the move in, move out loading off the street. But we're going to narrow down the dimension of that curb cut to a minimum. And then we're using the parking lot that we're making as a convenience for the liquor mart and the other retail spaces as an off-street, more informal loading zone too. And then we've designated 2 on-street loading zones for retail and, for busy turnover of the month loading. So that's what we're doing. It has to do with kind of limitations of the site, but I don't recall exactly what the terms of the waiver were.
Yeah, that's exactly one of them. This Adam Dash again, Tim. A curb cut requires a permit from the city engineer. Curb cuts are prohibited along all thoroughfares designated as pedestrian streets. Vehicular entrance to parking lots are prohibited along any thoroughfare designated as pedestrian street. We need a waiver from the need to obtain a curb cut permit from the city engineer and waiver from prohibition on curb cut on the pedestrian street. And then it said curb cuts are provided on Broadway to access a loading area for building 2. Curb cuts are provided on Broadway and Temple Street to the parking lot on lot 3, serving the adjacent property uses and to provide access and loading for lot 2.
Yes. So just one other piece of information. We've had 3 meetings with mobility at the city about, the compromises of how to solve this, including Brad Rawson's participation. And there's support on the city staff that this is the best solution given the constraints of the site.
There are two others. One of them had to do with screening of loading, that outdoor loading facilities, including the docks and areas used for storage of materials, be screened by wall or view, fully enclosed fence between 6 and 12 feet in height. Exterior entrances and access to loading facilities are not fully enclosed within a building, must have an opaque self-closing door. Loading facility doors are only permitted to be open during loading or unloading activities. We're seeking a waiver from screening requirements for the loading area, as the loading areas of Building B on Lot 2 is exposed towards Broadway, and a gate or fence would be unsightly when not in use and present an operational challenge. So that's that one. And then there is another regarding buildings providing spaces for uses that regularly receive or distribute large quantities of goods must provide loading facilities as required by Director of Mobility. Loading facilities must be sufficient to adequately serve the intended use. We're seeking a waiver from the need to obtain the approvals from the Director of Mobility, as the loading facilities for Building A on Lot 1 and Building B on Lot 2 will provide loading facilities as shown on the plans approved by the Zoning Board. So that's just more of a procedural matter, not to have to get them approved by the Zoning Board and then have to go to the Director of Mobility and get it approved again, because the comprehensive permit is comprehensive by its nature. There are some, there was another, is this the other one about screening? The loading area of Building B on Lot 2 is, yep, that's the same one. So yeah, so those are the loading waivers.
I'm happy to point those out in a ground floor plan that we could pull up, but maybe that's enough information.
I think they're fairly, straightforward, I think.
So just to confirm, I'm sorry, I'm looking at your application, and the last of the waivers regarding loading that Attorney Dash had read, which was buildings provide space for uses, et cetera, et cetera. Are you saying that loading facilities are sufficient to adequately serve the intended uses, but the waiver that you're seeking is specific to the approval of the Director of Mobility, as opposed to, it sounds like you're making that this is a waiver specific to process, and if you could just outline again what the process would be and the waiver that's being requested, and that the waiver, and confirm that the waiver is not about adequacy of the loading facilities, that would be helpful to me.
I guess, I don't know, Randy, have you been, or Damien, have you been talking with Brad Rawson about the loading facilities in particular?
Oh yeah, we've had extensive conversations with Mobility about the overall curb management plan, loading. We spent a lot of time on that.
I think Amelia's question is more of a procedural question, though.
Yeah, well,
my question is looking for confirmation that you're not seeking a waiver from the provision that loading facilities be sufficient, because I want loading facilities to be sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, as a process matter, we're seeking to have to go get a double approval because the comprehensive permit covers it. However, the question she's asking is, do they meet the requirements that the loading facilities are sufficient to adequately serve the intended uses? And the only reason we're seeking the waiver is to avoid having to get a second okay. Which I think is the case, but I don't know, Randy or Robert or Damien would probably have to back me up on that, or Tim. I mean, the loading docks are there, they're on the plan.
They're adequate. I mean, I think the waivers are about the requirements for screening and more the architectural treatment, but from a solution standpoint, based on Mark Development's experience about buildings of the scale and move in and move outs, which is the biggest thing to consider, which happens at the beginning of 4 months out of the 12 where the demand is higher. It's very well considered in terms of the functionality of it. It's my understanding that the waivers are required because we're not meeting some of the architectural treatment requirements.
Well, that's the screening. That's the screening one I was talking about.
Yeah, Adam Dash, if I could add just some color here. So for this specific waiver, we are seeking a waiver from the need to obtain approvals from Director of Mobility. So it's more procedural than it is related to adequacy.
Form over substance.
That's right. That's what I was just looking for confirmation. Thank you. And then the other one is the screening, just because it would look bad on Broadway. And then the other one has got to do with the loading on the pedestrian street has to happen on Broadway, because otherwise we're forced to do the loading through the residential street in the back on Sewell, which the neighbors and we and nobody else wants. So
it actually would have impacted, Sewell Park as we would have had to take an area away from Sewell Park to create, loading access to the back of the buildings.
Good point. So those are the loading waivers.
Thank you.
Now let's talk parking.
Parking. All right, well, luckily we have our parking expert here this evening, Damien.
Thanks, Robert. So, Mr. Chair, I think parking, by the tone of your voice, is probably, I'm picking up on, is probably the more sensitive of the waivers. And I will say,
I'll say, Damien, it's the one that the council has indicated that was most important to the neighborhood.
yeah, and I think
And being very, very familiar with that neighborhood, having grown up there, I'm concerned about it too. But I'm always happy to have a discussion.
yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I think
Talk more about the technicalities of there being ample parking in the study that we did, and conversations with mobility on, transportation demand management, or are you more interested in, why the need for these waivers?
So so Robert, as I recall your team's presentation on why the waiver was requested was the need for mediation underground based on some of the stuff that you guys have discovered in your due diligence and in looking at the project. And so I understand the reason for the waiver. I think. Am I summarizing that appropriately?
well,
Yeah, that's a very, abbreviated version as to why, but sufficient, yes.
Okay, I get that. So I think you guys are within the typical walk shed of a proposed, now an existing T-stop, right?
yeah,
On the very edge.
we're at the edge of the half-mile radius. That's right.
Yep. Okay, so what we've seen as a planning board are applicants who are actually outside the walk shed who seek parking relief and say, just pretend we're inside, we don't want to do any parking, and we'll be subject to the requirements that the planning board usually imposes when somebody proposes a parking waiver or something similar to that, which is we say, okay, if you aren't going to provide on-site parking and I'm not going to identify a sufficient off-site parking to satisfy what you're not providing on your property, that we restrict the ability for residents by way of a condition to get a residential parking sticker or guest permits, because for what the applicant can't provide, we don't want to unduly burden the neighborhood with. Obviously, we're not the permit granting authority, but I would be inclined to say, okay, you can't provide the waiver and you can't provide the parking, or it doesn't make financial sense for you to be able to provide the parking because of the cost of various items relating to construction to build that parking. I would be in favor of the planning board making a recommendation to the ZBA that they consider a condition similar to what the planning board usually recommends in circumstances like this, which is a restriction on residents of the building who benefit from the waiver to then provide a detriment to the neighborhood by adding 78 other or more cars. So I come at this as somebody who's generally in support of the application and somebody who intends to vote to recommend the application for approval to the ZBA. But I am also cognizant of the concerns of the councilors and concerns of the neighborhood that this is a sticking point. And I'm trying to find a way to fit both sides, to allow your project to go forward, but also not burden the Winter Hill neighborhood with cars that otherwise should be on your property. So I think what I would recommend, and I would propose that the planning board recommend, is that the ZBA consider imposing that condition as a condition of that particular waiver, because this is something that's certainly not unique to you. It's not unique to the city or other projects that we've seen, or the ZBA has seen. It's something that we've actually baked into our code for folks that are within that watershed. So I'm happy to have that discussion, but that's kind of where I'm at on that.
If I may, Mr. Chair, first, just so I'm not confused, what exactly is the condition again that you would recommend?
The condition is generally when somebody is requesting a waiver of parking that is otherwise required on their site and they have not found a sufficient off-site location for those cars. For example, we've got applicants who have said, I can't put it on my site, but I'm partnering with this business that doesn't do business after 5 o'clock, and they've given me access to their lot for the 15 cars that otherwise would have to be on mine. I don't think you've done that. So where it's, I simply don't want to or can't put the parking on my property, and they would otherwise be on the street. What we have done is say, no, we're not going to burden the neighborhood with an additional 78 cars. We are going to say the 78 spaces can't get residential stickers. So for the folks that otherwise would be parking on the street, they won't be. They'll have to find a solution themselves because they're within the walk shed of a T-stop. That was kind of the incentive behind putting places close to the T-stop, is if you don't want to put parking in your building or can't put parking in your building and you're close to a T-stop, that's fine, but we're going to presume that people will bike, ride, walk, to disincentivize car ownership and all the other good stuff that's in Somervision, and we'll see if that actually plays out. So that's what we've done, and that's kind of where I'm at, is to make a recommendation to the ZBA that they consider adopting the planning board's kind of usual condition on that waiver, but otherwise grant the waiver so you don't have to spend X number of dollars to do something to the project that would make it otherwise untenable.
So, excuse me if I'm being a bit dense here, but I think another way of putting, would it be fair to say that you're really, what you're doing is recommending, denial of the parking waiver?
No, that's not what I'm recommending. Because waiver of the parking requirement would be that you wouldn't put it on site.
No, waiver, you're recommending denial of
Resident
the waiver to the transit shed issue that we have here.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, just to be clear, there's more than one parking waiver. Maybe that's where we're getting some confusion here, Mr. Chair. It's Adam Dash. One of them is.
Let's talk about that and clarify the issue then.
In the half-mile transit area, as you know, commercial uses have to have parking, even though residential uses do not. So we're seeking a waiver. One of our waivers is to not provide the parking that's required for commercial on site. So I think that may be the one you're talking about. There's another waiver I think that Robert's talking about, which is that we're seeking for a waiver from the rule that those in transit areas cannot have residential on-street parking permits. And we're seeking a certain percentage of those that we would, not for all the units, but a certain percentage of those for the market rate units. We are in the process also working with mobility to have a very robust disincentive program for that, to actually not only have people pay for the parking permits with the city, but also that we would then impose a surcharge on that. And that money could be used for other TDM measures, which we're working with mobility on what those would be. But the idea is to make it more painful for people who want to get one of those parking permits, in addition to having a city-owned, blue bike station, providing, Charlie cards for new residents, a 1-month blue bike membership for new residents, Having the commercial spaces over 2,000 square feet, have the employers offer 90% subsidy to full-time employees for transit pass, bus passes, and Blue Bike memberships, having at least one zip card on site, and having an on-site TDM coordinator and joining any local, TMA type of programs that there may be to gather together on it. So all of the idea is to robustly disincentivize the need for those parking permits. And with the new green line being there in Gilman Square, that's kind of a game changer that we don't have data on how that's going to operate. It could very well be that, in fact, you're going to have a much lower parking demand here just because that opened, which is always a possibility. So we're only seeking 50% of the market rate units getting the permit. So I think what Robert's saying is, by what you were describing, Mr. Chair, basically is a recommendation of denial on the parking permit waiver that we're seeking.
If Emily is still around and is listening, I'm wondering if she might be able to speak a little bit more about some of the incentives, because Adam was discussing some of the ways that mobility is looking to mitigate the concern of the neighborhood on the additional vehicles that will inevitably be put on places like Jake Street and all the other places around there.
I'm glad to do that, Mr. Chair. I think Attorney Dash gave a very good overview. And again, the team has been working diligently with the mobility division. We will be stating support of this project with conditions. We are completing our final review of the project, and the mobility division in particular is completing its final set of recommendations with a large number of strategies, again, most of which have been summarized for you this evening by Attorney Dash. They are also proposing a phasing out, if you will, over the next 20 years of the ability for market rate units to apply for on-street parking permits in a way that addresses the need now and also ensures that the project remains on track with Summer Vision 2040 and maintains its parallel course with our goals as a city, as a community, and getting cars off of the street. And so we believe strongly that with those measures, with the measures described for you this evening to incentivize alternative modes of transportation, disincentivizing the parking permits, particularly for the market rate units, that there will be a limited impact of that this waiver would have. I was going to say one additional thing and it has slipped my mind. I apologize.
But thank you, Emily. The sun setting is important to note that we would be, this isn't a forever thing.
I don't want to talk unnecessarily here, but in just listening to all this, I can't help but feel that, we're very somewhat proud about where we've landed here with this project. And we've dealt very openly and honestly, with the neighborhood, counselors, anybody, that's been interested in engaging with us. And, I feel like this conversation to some degree is just like sort of out of context in my world, because, while I appreciate that most of if there is any negativity on this application, it's always been about this parking waiver. And so I think it's important, to just, Mr. Chair, if I may, give you a little bit of context as to how we got there, because, of course, we would like to have a perfect project. We always strive for perfection, and we were actually on track towards perfection when we initially started this project. It was a typical 80-20 affordability, market rate to affordability deal. And in working with our capital market partners, when we're trying to size up the need for parking, it was designed, we had a garage designed to support a 0.5 ratio, which we felt was the bare minimum that would be needed here, basically to get a shovel in the ground due to the capital market needs. Capital markets are much more risk averse than we are. We are very proud and going to strive for car-free development, but we're faced with the realities of, how do we get a shovel in the ground? Otherwise we got nothing to strive for. So so the neighborhood loved, for the most part, we won the hearts and minds of the neighborhood, which was thrilling to us. We love engaging and creating projects to make positive impacts to communities and allow communities to have a hand in designing these projects and creating them. And we were very excited, and even to the point where we went out and then started doing very significant boring work out there because we wanted to get a head start on designing foundations and whatnot. And it was through that due diligence and back in February of 22, we got the results back and we found out about the environmental condition. And I had a complete, if I may, oh shit moment, oh my God, how deflating. We come this far, we had a wonderful thing going, and I refuse to give up, okay? So how do I take a lemon now and turn it into lemonade, right? That was the goal at that point in time. And what we came up with was, in my opinion, a very creative solution that, again, is recognizing is not perfect. But it does come with significant attributes that the first project proposal did not have. And the solution that we came up with was, we are convinced, and there's significant MAPC research out there that was done in 2019, it's known that parking demand for affordable units is significantly less than market. So an obvious way then to drive down parking demand, because we didn't want to come in and ask for a waiver for on-street parking on an 80-20 deal and ask for 150 parking permits, okay? We felt that was too much of a burden to ask the neighborhood to bear here. So the solution was increase the affordable units, which simultaneously drives down parking demand, creates fewer market rate units, right? So we go, these are approximate numbers, from 300 market rate to 150, okay? By creating 150 more affordable units, and that only necessitates a need for 75 on-street parking waivers. So, like everything in life, it's like a give and take here. It's a beautiful thing that, we're able to provide for, all this affordability now, which, everybody, including myself, is excited about, but it still requires the need here for this now reduced waiver, not 150, but, it's, to be exact, 78 parking passes. And, we are sympathetic. We know it's not perfect, but it was the best dose of lemonade we could come up with when we were faced with that lemon. And, it's something we need. And we put it out there to everybody when we made this pivot to more affordability. Please recognize we've worked hard here creatively to get to this place, but we cannot get a shovel in the ground due to capital market constraints without the 78 parking passes, having the ability to draw upon them. And we're trying to mitigate that in a very substantial way, working with mobility on a very, extensive transportation demand management plan, even to the point where we've suggested and they're enthused that, we're trying to come up with a figure that, we'll charge these residents. It's not going to be, $10 a month or whatever. We haven't come up with the amount yet, but we'll charge these residents to have the ability to get these parking passes. And that money in turn will go in to beef up the TDM plan, which is going to work against parking demand, and hopefully end up in a place where the data, by the time you get to 2040, the data is going to suggest there's absolutely no need to continue on with these passes. And that is our goal. And that is, thank you for allowing me to indulge, and I just felt it was important to give you some context here. And, it's not perfect, but it's got a hell of a lot of affordability. It is a sustainable project. We're committing to Passive House. We're very excited about this project, and one that we hope can be a leader not only for more of these types of projects in the Somerville market, but beyond, because the greater Boston housing region, we're in desperate need of more affordability, and we're excited about using this one as a poster child for creating more affordability throughout the region. And I'll tell you right now, flat out, if I get my way, we'd be doing a similar deal. I'd love to develop Gilman Square and the home and stuff, and the mobile station. And in that particular case, we would not be asking for the waivers. We think we have a compelling argument in the capital markets down there. You're right on top of the T station. We're just on the edge here. We're like, if you look at that transit shed map, we are the last parcel, right? That was included. The line very easily could have been drawn to exclude us and only us, and we wouldn't even be here having this discussion about the waiver.
And Robert, being on the other side of Broadway makes it even more difficult, because obviously pedestrians and bikes having to cross that is almost like a barrier, makes it less of a walkable situation than it would be on the other side of Broadway.
So I in conclusion, I just ask, before you reach a conclusion on whether or not to recommend against this waiver, think of, let's not let perfection be the enemy of the good. A very common phrase we hear often, and this is a perfect case of that. There's a lot of amazing attributes coming out of this project, and I hate to see this request for, for 78 parking passes, ruin that. So I plead with you to please consider that in your decision.
I very much respect that, and thank you for kind of walking us through where you were at and where you're, where you are now. It is, and I also want to thank Emily and Adam for walking us through some of the considerations that mobility is looking at to put into conditions. And obviously the planning board isn't the permit granting authority here. We're only making a recommendation. So this is ultimately going to be up to the ZBA. So what I would love to incorporate in a recommendation that we make is that the ZBA take these considerations and propose conditions by mobility very, very seriously, and look at them if they don't think that they're sufficient, to consider whether it makes sense to deny that particular waiver. At this point, based on the conversation we just had, I'm disinclined to recommend that they deny that waiver, and I'm inclined to have them strongly look at what mobility is proposing as conditions, and to engage with that staff and you all more vigorously to make sure that that's the appropriate way to go. And Adam, by the way, I'm very, very certain that that barrier crossing Broadway at some point is going to have 2 or 3 randomly created concrete islands and speed bumps, which is apparently what we're doing all over the city. So don't worry.
As my grandmother would say, from your mouth to God's ears. But yeah, we'll see.
Driving down Holland Street, it's like driving a slalom now. So I've unfortunately talked way more than I anticipated talking. So I'm hoping or wondering if there's anybody else on the board who wants to have a discussion. I see Amelia's very small hand because there's so many people on camera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if we could discuss, I do have some additional questions for the applicants. I'm not sure in what order you are planning on conducting this discussion. Specific to the parking waiver, I would like to follow up on the concept that Emily mentioned about the possibility of phasing out that on-street parking permits over time. I actually came to this meeting prepared to suggest sunsetting of the waiver exemption as a way that this board might, or that I would propose this board consider recommending the waiver. And I think that 20 years sounds a bit long, since that will take us beyond our 2040 goal at this moment in time. But would love to have more of a discussion amongst the board and or with the applicant and Emily on what a sunsetting provision for that might allow this project to stay on track, but also allow us to be better aligned with our overarching sustainability framework might be.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is Emily Hutchings. If I can just interject, sorry to interrupt. I just did want to clarify that the sunsetting and phasing out would meet the 2040 requirements. So we aren't looking for necessarily an exact 40 years or 20 years, I'm sorry. I was generalizing and not remembering that we are already in 2023.
17 years, yeah. And the idea is that at that time would be to work with the Director of Mobility to assess what the due data and see what the actual demand is, and then sort of reestablish the situation at that time. If it turns, because then obviously the green line will be long established, and as Mr. Capuano stated, who knows what's going on with the Broadway crossings. But if all of that gets to the good, then
right, Adam. It's data dependent. It's important, you know, to have a concrete sunset unfortunately isn't going to work for us, and that's why we've been so willing. You know, one of the reasons why we're so willing to layer on very extensive TDM measures. The idea of charging for parking being one that goes into a TDM plan, but in the end, it's important that we rely on the data for that sunset. It's not cast in concrete, because we're just gonna, it's a zero-sum game. We're just gonna end up right back in the same vicious circle of discussion with the capital markets. It's like, okay, well, you know, it's an automatic sunset to go from, you know, 78 to, you know, 39 passes in 2030, but, you know, it's not going to get us to where we need to be with the capital markets. We're willing to incur substantial costs and effort and really have our hearts into the cause, by the way, into these TDM measures, but we have to rely on the data. And I believe mobility's on, you know, on board as far as we can tell with these discussions, or at least appreciate that dynamic. So I ask you all to also please try to take that into consideration as it relates to the sunset, that it needs to be data driven.
I appreciate that. Can I ask, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Amelia. I have just one question, if you don't mind. Who's going to be collecting that data? Is it going to be you, or is it going to be the city? Is it going to be, you know, MEPC? Is it going to be the Commonwealth? Is it going to be the MBTA?
Well, I would think the city. I mean, you have to go to the city to get the pass, so they're going to have full records on how many residents that live in our building are applying for these passes.
I respect that. This is certainly not a dig to you, and it's nothing that you can control. I anticipated it was going to be the city. My only concern, and again, I'm not going to lay that concern on you for the purpose of this this vote, is we are not always the best at following up on data when we say we're going to do more studies and figure out what's going on and enforce what we've actually said we're going to enforce.
Well, we'll have the data as well.
Kind of one of the circumstances I'm thinking about is the bus lane that goes right in front of your property. It was put in 5 or 6 years ago with the anticipation of saying we're going to make this a dedicated bus lane / bike lane and take out a lane of traffic, take out some parking, and see where we're at. And to my knowledge, there has been no follow-up on whether that has actually worked, whether it's alleviated any issues in the city whatsoever. And so my concern is not with you. My concern is with us actually doing what's necessary to follow up on making sure that that data exists. Again, I'm not going to put that burden on you for the purpose of me considering this vote. This is more just me being frustrated with us not always following up where we say we're going to follow up.
Well, if I may, Damien, I'm not seeing any operational issue if the burden or the onerous falls upon us, particularly if we reach this agreement that we're going to be required to charge a certain amount of our tenants. So we're going to have all the data.
So what we typically do on other properties, Mr. Chair, is we both provide a TDM coordinator who's responsible for submitting data to the city on an annual basis, as well as in this instance, we're also looking at joining a TMA as one of the commitments to the TDM. So I think you have either, as Robert pointed out, an opportunity for us as the applicant to be responsible for it, which we'd be happy to do. Or if that's a discomfort for this board, we would be happy to talk about, potentially a third party through our TMA commitment that we've already included as part of our discussions to date. So if that makes you more comfortable than having the city be the jurisdictional party or whatever the right thought process is here, we're happy to explore other avenues.
I mean, it's certainly not my, my authority or the planning board's authority to dictate who's going to be taking this data to be able to govern that sunsetting provision. I'm just kind of speaking as someone who's been aggrieved by us not always following up the way we said we're going to follow up, by certain planning board conditions, by certain studies that we said that we're going to do and haven't done. But Amelia, I'm very sorry that I cut you off with a question on that, but please.
As always, enforcement is the sort of boogeyman of the planning board process. I'm sympathetic to the explanation that's been given of how we got here and the accommodations that have been made to try to reduce the parking waiver overall. I have just spent a lot of time with this application trying to reconcile it with the remit of the planning board, and the planning board's specific objectives are to make sure that development is aligned with the master plan document for the city, which is Summer Vision. And there are ways in which this project is hugely aligned with Summer Vision goals, and there are ways that it sort of runs counter to it. And so I'm just trying to see if there are any ways we can nudge it into line to be more aligned with those goals and sort of reduce the ways in which it runs counter. I hear that parking is a sticking point. I hear that parking is commercially necessary. I would not be in favor of slowing down a project that's producing this much housing, let alone this much affordable housing, over the parking waiver at this time, given the measures that you've described and that Emily has described that are being taken with mobility. That said, it is something that sort of runs counter directly to one of the stated goals of our city's master plan, which this board is charged with adhering to and bringing things into compliance with. So that's the source of, you provided your context, I'm providing our context. I have 2 other Summer Vision categories that I have similar sort of points of conflict about, which I would like to discuss if and when we are moving beyond the discussion of the parking topic.
Discussion now, or we can figure out where we want to go.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just on the parking topic, not adding anything to already a pretty substantive discussion, I'm just going to echo sort of Amelia's comments here. I think she provided a really great context of where we're coming from here. And I'll echo what I've heard from the community, which is it's a great project. Parking is a sticking point. Like, I'm really glad we're having this conversation because it makes me feel like we're going to be able to walk away and say, we have done everything we can, right? And nobody wants to, approve a project and say, oh, I wish we could have done better. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. And, kind of what I heard, at least from the community, was we love this project. Parking is sticky. What can we do to try and make it better? But let's not stall it over parking. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I just want to say that I really liked the TDM measure that you have in place of being able to charge the market rate units in addition to, basically like if you're going to get a parking pass, we're going to charge you a little extra.
Right.
And, I would maybe encourage you guys to ramp up that charge as we get closer to 2040 if those parking numbers aren't coming down, right? There's a give and take here.
I think that's a good idea.
We can use that, right?
I like that idea.
I think it's a good recommendation.
So thank you. I'm all set.
If I may add to Erin's point, I think the community feedback is something that's definitely driving all of us to try and overlook and get past the parking issue. But one of the things I've been struggling with is the advisory committee that was specifically formed as your advisory committee from the community for this project gave you a recommendation, and their comments on the parking in that endorsement letter were not really an endorsement of the parking approach. It was a paragraph saying, we're really not sure about the parking. It seems like it's still in flux and we have conflicting viewpoints. So I don't think there's anything to be done about that at this stage, quite frankly, but had that been more explicitly also an endorsement, I would personally, as one member, have an easier time getting to the other side.
I think the issue there, if I may, is at the point in time they reached that conclusion you're referring to, there had been no discussion yet with mobility or anyone about TDM measures, all the measures that we've talked about here tonight. If helpful, I think we wouldn't mind going back to CAC and talking to them about, the TDM plan, if you think that would be useful. And at least then they'll be more up to speed with where we're all at on some of these measures and how seriously we're taking it and dealing with it. And perhaps they'll be more comfortable. I don't know, but would certainly be willing to do so. But they clearly had no context of these TDM measures at the time.
Yeah, we've certainly, and as Adam Dash, we've certainly moved beyond that bit as well, that whole CAC process, because we're deep in it with mobility right now. And we're going to end up with an MMP, that's going to get executed at some point, that's going to have all of this, in there as a contract with the city, that these things will be done. And the idea is to, again, revisit them all over time and see how it all plays itself out. But it's I guess Robert said it, I guess I could be more blunt. It's like kind of hard, you can't really do the project without that waiver. And I think what we've heard from a lot of the neighbors is that that's a trade-off they're willing to make because of the significant open space and park that's created, and the sustainability and the affordability and the removal of the blighted site. And honestly, any other developer who's going to do anything on this site is going to encounter the same problem. So it just isn't, it's not something we looked for. We tried to do the parking underground. It's just something that happened, and we're kind of trying to make the best out of the situation. And it seems as though, and I know it's an ask, I know, but overall, if you've got 90% of the subdivision goals and this is the 10% left, it's considering the oddities and weirdness of what's going on with this site, it's not so bad, and all the gain that comes out of it, we feel it's worthwhile, but for what it's worth.
Maybe in the end you ask yourself, I often do this to myself, what would have been a better outcome here? The 80-20 deal with underground parking on site, or where we are today with 50%, affordability? It's tough, but I think when you think about it in that context, it's really what we're talking about here. There's a trade-off involved, and it's unfortunate that we can't make it perfect, but perhaps that could help thinking about it in that way.
I don't think at this point, Mr. Corp, that anyone's disagreeing with sort of the strategic compromises that you've been making. And it's not, I don't think the role of this board to suggest you go back to the CAC for an update on that. But if you find yourself having a similarly sticky conversation with the ZBA, perhaps an updated conversation with the CAC would serve you well. That's just my personal opinion. I'm not pushing for that to be a recommendation of this board.
Thank you.
Amelia, did you have more questions or discussion that you'd like to raise?
I did have one other item for discussion that we didn't discuss last week, but we did discuss several months ago when the applicant's team came to us with their.
Let's talk about that.
Thank you. That was the question I'd raised as to the percentage of affordable units that would be accessible and whether there was any consideration being given to going beyond ADA requirements. Again, I'm going back to Summer Vision and the sort of strong central tenets of that plan being based on equity, and one of the housing priorities being increasing the percentage of affordable accessible units in the city's housing stock. As I think we all know, Tim's nodding, I think it's very difficult to retrofit existing housing stock to meet the needs of people with more significant mobility challenges. And I know firsthand that from conversations with our committee on disabilities for the city that we have a real lack of affordable housing that is suitable for those with more mobility challenges, and with the attention given to also sort of seniors and aging in place in our master planning process. I think that if that's something where there was any willingness or ability to move the needle, it would make a really disproportionate positive impact for the members of our community facing those challenges. So I'd love to hear what the existing proportion is, if it's just ADA baseline or higher, and whether there might be any willingness to go beyond that.
Leanne, would you like to respond to that one?
Yeah, no, happy to. Thank you for your question. Tim, I might have to just defer to you on what the existing plans call for. I imagine it's 5%. Is that right? 5 and 2 on ADA, and then hearing.
Yeah, but because it's an elevator access building, all of the units in the building are type 1 or type 2 accessible. So, and because of the DHC guidelines, which are already geared toward limited mobility people throughout the project, those units through LIHTC, DHCD funding go through a rigorous review based on a whole range of design standards that that market rate units don't have to go through.
Yeah, that's right. So I think today, under the letter of the law, we have, I think, 5% in that group, those group 2A units that are traditional accessible units. I think, to answer your question, it would be an easy thing for us to do, to examine the other accessible units and make them truly ADA accessible if that was something that we felt strongly about.
I think the challenge is the dimensional requirements for full ADA and the additional dimensions of the bathrooms and turning radii and things would have a significant impact on the number of units.
So I think, yeah, and when I say we can look at it, I don't envision it to be half, but if we wanted to go from 5% to 10%, something like that, we could look at that. I do think it would require additional consideration, as Tim alluded to, to make sure that we're.
I know that your team has already been very accommodating in increasing the proportion of units that are larger. And I wonder, I don't know the need for larger like 3-bed affordable units, or the need for more type 2 accessible affordable units is higher. I'm not sure how the city is thinking about that, but if that, for instance, were part of the calculus. But I would love if you were open to a follow-up conversation with the city's disability coordinator or Committee on Persons with Disabilities to hear more about their needs and think about whether there could be sort of low-hanging fruit to be to be included here because there's so little new construction at a scale like this with this much affordable that it seems like a really great place to try to meet some of that need.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to offer that to your question about which is the higher need. I would just say that from a state housing policy perspective, the desire for 3 bedrooms is certainly a stronger push and driver. That's a pretty strong priority for the state.
And that, excuse me, that mix of units is being worked through with the city housing team. So that program mix, the amount of each of those unit types is partly driven by the application that Leanne and her team made to DHCD, but partly based on several discussions with the city's housing team.
Understood, and I understand that it's a multifaceted issue. The immediate past chair of the Commission on Persons with Disabilities for the City of Somerville was forced out of Somerville for lack of being able to find an affordable, accessible unit, and that was a person with all of the connections and ability and knowledge to sort of seek that out. And I think that is a good example of the challenge that folks in those situations are facing. So I would just encourage us to look at that if that's something that your team is willing to have a few more conversations with the city on.
I think that's absolutely something we can have the conversation. Let's get in touch with the disability department, you know, whoever the right person is, and I think we should have the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amelia, did you have any additional questions or discussion points that you want to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third is, I think, more minor because I do trust the applicant's team and operations will adhere to this, but I wanted to be one more voicing another one of the principles of Summer Vision is about equity and equitable access. And you mentioned offhand in your previous presentation, you know, ensuring that all residents of this project would have equal access to the sort of amenities and resources that you're bringing to bear on it. And I commend you for making that commitment up front, and just wanted to call out that when I think about the pros and cons of this project, I think having an all affordable building and an all market building sort of runs counter to a lot of the principles of equity that we normally seek out in urban projects. And I hope that your efforts to make everything else on the site equally accessible and in like kind will compensate for that unfortunate, I know necessary bifurcation of units by income.
Yeah, and I can assure you that that's something I personally, considered and took very seriously when we arrived at this pivot. It was very, very important to me personally that, first of all, from the outside looking in, there'd be no way somebody's going to be able to say, oh, one building's affordable and the other isn't. But also it was the integration, of this project at the ground level. It's going to be one community, interacting from the outside. And in terms of amenities, there'll be cross-pollination of amenities between the two buildings. The segregation of incomes was solely dictated, by capital stack needs, in the affordable housing side. It's hard to mix the two together and get sufficient funding. So, I appreciate the comment and just want you to know it was something at the outset that I took very seriously. And I think we've achieved it through design and wholeheartedly feel that, in practice, it's going to work that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There are a lot of, I see Aaron's end.
One
There are a lot
more.
of cameras out there and everybody's very small, so I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for picking up. One other very quick comment, and this is just, again, sort of a minor point. One of the things that has been called out is sort of a lack of community gardens in the city, sort of a long wait list for basically getting a vegetable plot as you were in the city. And you guys are, hand in hand developing Sewell Park, which may have space for an amenity like this. So not wanting to put a condition on it, but wanting to voice, sort of that, like this issue that's come up at a city level previously to you guys as you're talking with, Department of Forestry as you're developing that park. So I just wanted to put that bug in your ear. Please consider, community garden space, if at all possible, when you're developing, especially accessible garden space. There's only one in the city that has wheelchair accessible plots. So that's that entire comment.
Is that the one, Adam Benjamin, or you may not have been with me, that Tory runs that we visited in the city?
That may be it. It's one of the newer ones is got the fully raised beds. Everything else is sort of like a foot off the ground.
Yeah.
So the location that Robert's describing is the growing center that we met with Tori Antonino in person. So I don't know if that's the same that you're also referencing.
I don't believe it is. I would have to. There's 9 in the city. I'd have to jog my memory. But what I'm talking about are like the community garden plots that are kind of popped all around.
That can be rented that other people manage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Morgan from Future Green can speak to this, but we just got a long list of comments and suggestions from forestry, and they're skewing much more to multi-generational space and amping up play space for children. That's forestry's agenda, and so Morgan can speak more to that. But we recently got their memo of suggestions and edits, and we're working towards a deadline to meet their requests.
Yeah, and this Adam Dash, due to the large number of the 3 bedrooms and such in the family size units, particularly in the affordable side, there was a feeling that there needs to be space for the kids to play. And so,
I remember now early on in this project, what did we end up doing with I just can't visualize it, the strip off of Grant Street in back of the dentist's office that we always refer to as the dentist's office. You know what I'm talking about, Tim? Where Star Market.
Morgan, what's the latest proposal for that strip that runs out to Grant?
I think it's just fire.
It's fire access, so they can run across it.
That's right.
They can't get a truck in there, but they need to be able to walk, run up there to get to that side of the building with a hose. So we're not putting anything there.
But the concept you're describing is exactly what we had in mind for that area. It was across from the food center, across the street there on Grant. And we thought it was a perfect opportunity for growing center type use, but that went away when fire department needed that to be open for fire access. So we have thought of it, and I think it's a great idea, but we'll see what we can work out with forestry, see if we got enough space on Sewell.
That's great to hear from you guys, and I appreciate also the play space aspect of this, especially with a lot of kids and a lot of 3 bedrooms. It's limited space, competing interests. It's always a balance.
Indeed. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Aaron or Debbie, I'm sorry, Jahan or Debbie, were there anything that you wanted to address? And Aaron, were you through? No. The discussion about the open space kind of triggered a concern, but a thing that I want to flag for the ZBA and our recommendation, just because the open space in this project runs largely through privately owned buildings, and does have multiple points of access, but at the same time is still confined kind of by these buildings. One of the things that I regret most on my time at the planning board was the development of, I'm not going to say the particular site, but I have a feeling people might know what I'm talking about, was the site of a residential development in an old warehouse complex where the open space component was met by putting a central courtyard into the series of buildings, and the buildings did have a pass through from one side to the other. And so the intent was to be able to have members of the public be able to go in and use that central courtyard open space, and that would satisfy that. And that was a huge mistake on, I think, the planning board's part, because people don't recognize that central courtyard as being something that is publicly accessible. It's kind of viewed more as, if I go in here, I should have a residence here, or I should be buying something in the cafe and drinking in the courtyard on the bench. And I don't think that's going to happen with your project, just because there are those multiple points of entrance. And it's going to be, I think, based on the renderings that you've shown us, pretty open and accessible. I do want to just flag in our recommendation for the ZBA that they take consideration for the fact that because it's within a number of privately owned buildings, that particular attention be paid to identify the fact that it is publicly accessible open space and that it is not reserved for residents of the community. One of the comments that was made tonight was there are 3 bedrooms and the kids should have a play space. That's 100% true. I completely agree with that thought process. My only concern is for other people in the neighborhood feeling like they would be necessarily excluded from that publicly open space and thinking that it was dedicated for residents of the buildings that you're proposing. So I would just try to, a recommendation flag for the ZBA to find ways to identify for the public, this is public open space. You are welcome to use it. This is not just for residents of the building. This is for residents of the community. I want to avoid the mistake that I made a few years ago in not addressing that as well as I think the planning board could have. Other than that, I very much appreciate the discussion we had tonight. I think you all have very good points and very strong desire to have what I think is a largely beneficial project go forward, with some hangups for sure, but nothing is perfect. So I just want to make sure that nobody else has any other comments that they'd like to make before I move forward.
I just wanted to, Mr. Chair, if it's okay if I just make one comment about, I think your insightful comment about what's perceived to be public versus private. Even today, because of the bus stop, when the buses are going up the hill on Broadway, even informally, that's a very popular cut through to go through the chain link fence, down the stair, through the abandoned parking lot and out. And I observed in a couple of trips there when the weather was nicer that anyone getting off the bus wanting to go down Temple Street chose that route versus going all the way around the Liquor Mart and around to Temple. So we already have an audience of people that are going to use the route from the Civic Plaza through the Muse to Sewell Park. By the way, all at less than 5% slope, so fully accessible as their primary way they would move from the bus to get to the neighborhoods in that direction. I think the other piece is that both the Civic Plaza and Sewell Park have one of their long edges along the public sidewalks on Broadway on one side and Sewell on the other. So I think, unlike the example that you were using a kind of word picture to paint, those will seem like very public spaces, I think. And the Sewell Street Park isn't surrounded by our development at all. It's got existing buildings on both sides. So it'll really seem like it's part of the neighborhood.
I'm just going to take a little bit of contention with the idea that people are already cutting through the chain link fence and therefore they're going to think it's publicly open space. I used to cut through chain link fences in people's yards all the time. When you make it a little bit nicer, I'm disincentivized to do that. Yeah, there's the whole reason why you try to green up areas that might be a little bit, more destitute. Is people don't want to screw up something that is nice, and I don't care about cutting through a chain link fence in a junkie's hangout. But no, I do appreciate that.
Sorry, as a landscape architect, I would just add to this comment that we're also using, the signage strategy for the city, so that the access points on both sides, we have signage, and that also occurs at the entry on both sides of the Muse, along with a kind of very deliberate paving strategy to use the same paving material to kind of weld Broadway to Soul Street, and also a very significant lighting strategy so that there's quite a clear sight line and the use of kind of a civic scale kind of column light that'll bring you through the site. So there's a number of kind of landscape tactics and strategies that are being kind of layered on top of each other to help kind of reinforce the connectivity along with the kind of natural desire line that is existing, as Tim was mentioning.
I appreciate that. I don't think you and the team are doing anything to discourage that. All I want to do is flag for the ZBA that I want to make sure that they address this if it's necessary. That's it. That's all. I think you guys are doing a great job, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. I'm going to go through kind of a cycle of the cameras here to make sure that anybody else wants to speak will be recognized. I just want to make sure I see you before I move forward here. Okay, seeing none. Where I think we're at as a board is broadly and generally supportive of the application as it's been presented to us for the purpose of our recommendation to the ZBA. What I'd like to make particular note of in our recommendation is that the planning board recognizes the concerns relating to the parking waivers, that we recognize that mobility and the applicant team is trying to work towards disincentivization measures that would lend itself to an approval of that waiver by the ZBA. For me, I do want to say if the ZBA doesn't find that those measures satisfy the concerns of the councilors in the neighborhood, that it do consider denial. But that is not my recommendation as one member of the board. I believe the waiver should be approved with the appropriate considerations by mobility and by the applicant team. But I do want to give them the advice the planning board has taken certain action that they can also take if they find that it doesn't meet the satisfaction of their members in the community. I'd also like to make a point in the recommendation that we would like to make sure that the open space is dedicated to public open space and that we maximize the knowledge of the neighborhood that is the case. I'm trying to think of anything else that we've discussed that should be part of the recommendation. I see Amelia's hand.
Mr. Chair, if I may formalize our conversation on ADA access with a recommendation or condition that the Beacon Communities team meet with the Commission for Persons with Disabilities and consider opportunities to expand the number of type 2 units being included.
I think that's fine. Anybody else like to add anything to the recommendation that we've discussed or that you'd like to discuss now that we haven't already? Yes, Amelia.
Mr. Chair, apologies. This is just a comment for Emily, which is, to the extent possible, I'd really like to reference some of the summer vision goals that we've been discussing as part of this, and I would be more than happy to help with drafting or revising that if appropriate.
I will have as the chairman the opportunity, and I will absolutely share it with all the members of the board for your input as well, to make sure that the recommendation most accurately reflects what we've discussed tonight and the recommendation that we want to make to the ZBA before it's signed off on by me, because it's probably going to be a little bit lengthy, but you know, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that our concerns are addressed by way of our recommendation. So yeah, if you want to take a look at it and make sure it complies with where you think your recommendation should have been, I absolutely want you to do that. Does anybody else have anything else that we think ought to be in this recommendation, or modify what we've already suggested to be included? Okay. Seeing one more scan of the small cameras, none. What I'd like to do is make make a motion that the planning board recommend approval of this application to the ZBA with the comments and recommendations that we have made throughout the course of this meeting, and that I think were somewhat summarized in the last minute or two. Seconded by Amelia. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Fantastic. I want to thank you all for working with us over the last couple of weeks and months. This is a big project, and we want to make sure we get it right. You guys are doing a very, very big deal in the city of Somerville. It's a huge site, as you know, and I leave it now to the ZBA and to the community to make sure that you make it the best project it can be. Before we go, I want to recognize that at least at one point, I'm not sure if it is still the case. Let me take a quick scroll through. I do not see him here anymore. The planning board does or will have 2 additional new members coming in to replace members that have left, and so hopefully they will be up to the task of our next meeting. I look forward to meeting with them and engaging with their different backgrounds and viewpoints on development and our ordinances. So thank you all very much. I wish you all the best of luck in working with the ZBA and with the community in making this the best project that you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the board, for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
There's no other items before the planning board this evening. The chair is going to, we have one additional item. Yes, Amelia.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. I thought we were also having additional discussion on the rules and regulations that had been
Are we
proposed.
doing that? Is that tonight?
I can speak with that to that. I apologize. I think Raisa had noted in her email that because of how the holidays figured into this time frame, and because of staff being out on either vacation or sick time, there was both, we have run into a bit of a delay, so we will have any additional comment, a revised version for you to review next time. If you would like to provide any additional feedback, we are still receiving feedback. And we will be putting it on the agenda next time. Sorry.
I don't recall whether it was on the agenda for this meeting. I had two or three quick points of feedback on it, which I'm happy to share if it's appropriate to have discussion. If it wasn't on the agenda for tonight and I should just send them in writing to Risa, I can do that as well.
Okay, it was not on the agenda for this evening, so I'll let you do as you are
Apologies.
comfortable with. No problem. Sorry.
Nope, sorry, my mistake. Thank you.
Bring that up at our next meeting, and if your suggestions can be maybe addressed either in writing or, excuse me, or verbally next time it was brought up, we can figure it out. Jahan, did I see you raise your hand? Okay. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else that they would like to add for the good of the meeting? No. One. Okay, great. It is 7:33. I will say that due to the complexity of the project that we just had, I wasn't sure how long the meeting was going to go. I'm glad we had the discussion that we did. I think it's going to make a hopefully a worthwhile recommendation to the CBA that they move forward in doing what we would have done had it come to us had they not decided to go the route of 40B, to which the city is no longer subject. So with nothing further to add, the chair moves to adjourn, and I would really like us not to mirror the House of Representatives and have an issue with an adjournment vote. I'm gonna assume Amelia seconds.
Seconded.
The chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
John votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Thank you all very much. Have a great night. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.